Okay, so chapter 23. So 23 is all about personal property and basically your rights and the person who owns the property's rights when it deals with personal property. So as opposed to what we talk about in chapter 24, which is real property, real estate, your house, your land, those kinds of things. So here we're talking about personal property and a concept called a bailment. And I think it'll make sense when you'll realize how many times you've been involved with a bailment and you didn't even know it. So, okay. So there's two types of property, breaking it down before we get started in personal. So number one is real property. Real property. That is land and everything of value attached to it. Okay? Real property, land and everything of value that's attached to it. That's what we're going to learn about in chapter 24. Okay, and point A there, this transfers generally involve a written sales contract and a deed, D-E-E-D, that is recorded with the state. So when you sell your property, your real estate, your real property, you do it by signing a deed and giving that to the person who bought it. So that's what we're going to talk about in class when we do chapter 24. Today, we're going to talk about number 2, personal property. All right, personal property. And that is essentially property that is movable. Property that is movable. In point A, it can be transferred with a minimum of formality. Okay, it can be transferred to somebody else with a minimum of formality. Of course, if you're transferring your car, your boat, your trailer, those kinds of things, if they have a title, obviously you're executing a title. But for the most part, you sell your textbook to somebody. You sell something on Facebook Marketplace. You're selling your personal property. Nothing more formal than just giving it to somebody and them giving you the cash. Okay, so it's nothing like executing a deed and doing it that way. So a bailment, okay? A bailment, and again, this will make sense once we give some examples, because you'll realize how many times you've been involved with a bailment. So that means entrusting the personal property of one person, who's known as the bailor, B-A-I-L-O-R, entrusting the property of one person, the bailor, to the care of another person known as the bailee, B-A-I-L-E-E, who is obligated to return the bailed property to the bailor or dispose of it if they're directed to do so. So the bailor is the person who owns the property. The bailee is the person who's been entrusted with it. Think about a dry cleaning. Has anybody ever had anything dry cleaned? I know that's such a thing in the past. I don't even get stuff dry cleaned. My husband does religiously. It's hysterical. But when he goes there, he drops off his clothes. Those are his clothes that he's entrusting another person with. That's a bailment. You go to get your oil changed. You go to get your car worked on. You're dropping off your personal property, entrusting it to the care of somebody else for them to return it back to you. It doesn't even just have to be a service. Have you ever borrowed a friend's car? Have you ever borrowed their boat, borrowed their lawnmower? Borrowed anything. When you're doing that, they're entrusting their personal property to you. Okay, so all of that, you might have just thought of it as borrowing something or, getting a service done. That's a bailment. Anytime your personal property is in the care of another person with the expectation that they're going to return it back to you. Okay? So types of bailments. There's 3 different types. And the reason those are important is because your rights and your obligations are very different depending on whether you're paying somebody to take care of your property or if somebody's just borrowing it. So the first type of bailment, number 1, if you've got a bailment for the bailor's sole benefit. So remember, that's B-A-I-L-O-R. A bailment for the bailor's sole benefit. That is a gratuitous bailment made for the bailor's convenience and benefit. What that means is, if I'm the bailor and I own property, and I've got a bailment made solely for my convenience and my benefit. Take this, for example. Is anybody in here into boats? You might be with Marshall County near the lakes. No, we go every once in a while. We don't have a boat. But say I've got a boat and I need to store it in somebody's garage for the winter. That's a bailment, but it is for my sole benefit. I'm the bailer because I own the property. I'm storing it in somebody's garage. Is that giving them any benefit? No, it's taking up room. It's for my sole benefit. When that's the case, their duty to look out for my property and care for my property is going to be very minimal because it's a bailment that is for my sole benefit. I'm the only one getting anything out of that situation. So their duty to care for my property is going to be very, very low. And you can see why. They're getting nothing out of it. So number 2, we've got another one. A bailment for the bailee's sole benefit, B-A-I-L-E-E. This is a gratuitous bailment made for the bailee's convenience and benefit. This is me borrowing your boat. Okay, so it's not my boat. So say it's Griffin's boat. He's the bailor, I'm the bailee. If I borrow his boat, is he getting any benefit out of that? Absolutely not. In fact, I'm putting miles on his boat. I'm running the risk of wrecking it or doing something crazy. I'm using up the gas. It is a bailment for my sole benefit as the bailee. When that's the case, I have to use the utmost duty of care. I can't let anything happen to that property or it's going to be on me because it is for my sole benefit. So that is a bailment for the bailee's sole benefit, and it's made for the bailee's convenience and benefit only, okay? So when that's the case, you have to use the utmost duty of care. It's why I hate borrowing stuff from people because lo and behold, something always happens. I borrow my parents' car, an air vent will break. I borrow this and that will break. It never fails. I hate borrowing stuff. But if you do, use the utmost care. So number 3, the final kind of situation that you can imagine is a bailment for the bailor and the bailee's mutual benefit. For their mutual benefit. And that involves the bailor compensating the bailee for services that the bailee renders. Okay, so you've got a mutual benefit, and it involves the bailor compensating the bailee for those services. This is the most common kind of bailment. This is your dry cleaning example. This is your oil change example. This is getting your car serviced. You drop it off, I pick it up. The mutual benefit is I'm compensating you. So I'm not only getting a service done to my car or my clothes, but you're getting compensated for it. But while it's in your care, you still have a duty to protect it. But essentially, that duty is high, but I'm paying you so you have the ability to get insurance and all that kind of stuff. So that's your most common type of bailment, is dropping something off for a service, getting compensated for it, getting your clothes or your car or whatever back. So do those 3 types of situations make sense? Yeah? Okay. All right. So the bailee's rights. All right. So the bailee, remember, is the person who has the property that doesn't belong to them in their care, whether for their benefit or to their detriment or because they're getting paid to hang on to it. So what are their rights? What are their rights as the person who has somebody else's property in their possession? Number 1, they have the right to control and possess the property during the terms of the agreement. So they have the right to control and possess it. They have not stolen it. They're not trespassing. They have the right to control and possess it. Number 2, in some cases, they have the right to use the bailed property. Like the examples I told you, where you borrow your friend's boat, you borrow your friend's lawnmower, you have the right to control and possess it, and usually, depending on what kind of property it is, you've got the right to use it. Number 3, you've got the right to compensation. Now, obviously, you can agree otherwise with your friend. Oh, no, I'm not going to charge you to borrow my lawnmower. Just use it. Fill it up with gas, whatever. But if you don't have an agreement to the contrary, then you have the right to be compensated for hanging on to that property. And number 4, you have the right to limit your liability for damage to that property. You have the right to limit your liability. So you have the right, and I'm sure that this has happened, and we've never looked at the contract, but when we drop our car off for service and we sign here that your car will be, all of this will be done to your car, guarantee you, there's something at the bottom that says that their liability is limited to some extent, and whatever the case may be. But the person who's holding on to your property has the right to limit any liability that they may have towards you. And then if you don't like that, you can choose to take it somewhere else. Generally, 9 times out of 10, we don't care. We just want the service done. So, any questions on the bailee's rights? Now, what are their duties? So they've got control of your property. What do they have to do? What are their duties? So again, absent some type of an agreement that you have, the bailee must, 1, take reasonable care of the bailed property. They have to take reasonable care. Now, remember, we talked about the 3 different situations. So what's reasonable care will differ depending on whether they're getting compensated or whether it's for their sole benefit. It will differ, but generally speaking, you have to take reasonable care of that property. And number 2, you must surrender the property to the bailor or dispose of it if that's what they tell you to do. Okay, so you basically have to do what the bailor has told you to do, which is generally going to be return the property to them. In some situations, though, it might be to dispose of it if that's what they want you to do. And then next, so we've talked about the bailee, the person who has the property in their possession. So bailor, again, that's the person who owns the property. The duties of a bailor are essentially the same as the rights of a bailee. All right, so the duties of the person who owns the property but has given it to somebody else, those are generally the same as the rights of the person who has it in their possession, meaning generally they have the right to compensate. They have the duty, I'm sorry, not the right. They have the duty to compensate the bailee. So as the person who has the property in their possession, you have the right to be compensated. That's a duty of the person who owns the property. We have a duty to pay the person who changes our oil before they give us our car back, just like they have the right to be compensated for doing that. Does that make sense? Just very elementary type situations, but you've never I had never before I started teaching this class boiled down what is that situation really? What is it like? Okay, so bailments, you've got the idea. There are 3 special types of bailments that basically kind of have their own rules. And a lot of them you've probably been a part of, especially number 3. But first off is the common carrier. So number 1, a special type of bailment is the common carrier. This is someone who provides publicly available transportation for a fee and is strictly liable for any loss or damage to the bailed property after they take delivery of it. Okay, so common carrier. This is somebody who provides publicly available transportation services for a fee and is strictly liable for any loss or damage to the bailed property once it's in their possession. Now, there's going to be some situations that you can imagine where they're not going to be strictly liable. And that's point A there. They're not going to be strictly liable. So once the bailed property is in their possession, say it's in the back of their truck, and they're being paid to transport that property. There's going to be some instances where and remember what strictly liable means. It doesn't matter how much care and how much you try, it doesn't matter. You're liable if there's damage, okay? So common carrier, strictly liable for the loss or damage of personal property once it's in their possession while it's being basically delivered. But there's some instances where they're not going to be strictly liable. Point A, little 1, if there's an act of God, meaning, earthquake, tornado, something that could be classified as an act of God that destroys that property. They're not going to be liable for that. Number 2, a public enemies act. A public enemies act. War, basically. Number 3, the Bailors Act. The Bailors Act, meaning something that the person who owns the property did. Obviously, if you put it into somebody else's possession, but you as the owner of the property did something to cause the damage, they're not going to be liable. Number 4, a governmental order, which might come up when given COVID. Say that something is lost or restricted because of orders that have been placed down by the government related to COVID or whatnot. They're obviously not going to be liable for any damage or loss of items because of an order that was placed down. If they're transporting items and they won't survive, say it's food and it's not going to last long, and they can't get it to where it's going because of orders that have been put in place by the government regarding shutdowns or interstate traffic, all of that. If it's shut down and all of those personal products, the products go bad and there's a total loss of them while they're being transported to where they're going, obviously there's not going to be any liability on the person who was taking those items where they were supposed to go. And then number 5, the bailed property's inherent nature. If it's fireworks, if it's something that by its nature could be damaged or lost or totally destroyed because of its nature, because something's set off, then obviously the person who's carrying it to its next location is not going to be liable. Does that one make sense? Basically, it's just once all that personal property is in the common carrier's possession, they're going to be strictly liable for it unless there's one of these exceptions. And if that's the case, the person who's carrying it to its next location that's strictly liable for it is not going to be. Okay? Number 2, warehouse companies. Warehouse companies. This is someone who provides storage for a fee and is liable only for the loss of or damage to the bailed property that results from its negligence. Okay? Someone who provides storage for a fee and is liable only for loss of or damage to the bailed property that results from its negligence. So essentially, when you go, I have a storage unit because we ran out of room for our Christmas decorations because I'm a little bit like Clark Griswold. We put some stuff into a storage unit. We're assuming some risk there by having this in a standalone building that's maybe not monitored all the time, although most of them have security systems. But that the person who owns that storage company, they're only going to be liable to me if for any loss or damage to my property if they were negligent. So remember, negligence means you had a duty and you breached that duty. So basically you have to say, what is the standard of care for these people who own storage units? Does it make sense for them to be gated in? Probably. Does it make sense for them to have video cameras to catch somebody? Yeah, probably. Does it make sense? What is the standard of care? And remember, again, what we would do is we would look at every other storage unit owner and say, okay, you own a bunch of storage units. What do you do to protect those? So if they act negligent, they're going to be liable to us for damage to the items that we have that are in storage at their storage unit. And point A there, as a professional bailee. So basically, storage unit owners, they are professional bailees. They, as a profession, hold other people's belongings. As a professional bailee, the warehouse owes a higher degree of ordinary care. Of care than an ordinary bailee. So, if Griffin has my items, if I'm letting him hold on to them for a fee, then he's got a duty to maintain and make sure that they're protected. But he's my friend. He's not a professional bailee. So as a professional bailee, they have a higher duty of care. We can hold them to a higher standard to say, you should have had your area fenced in. You should have had video footage. You should have had this and that. If I'm just putting him in Griffin's garage, he doesn't have to do anything like that. He doesn't have to have security footage or fenced in, area. He's not a professional bailee. All right, and then finally, number 3, hotel operators. This is someone who, for a fee, provides public lodging as a regular business and is strictly liable for any loss of or damage to the guest's property. All right, this is someone who, for a fee, provides public lodging as a regular business and is strictly liable for any loss of or damage to the guest's property. So generally speaking, they're going to be liable for your property. And, for property that's within your room at a hotel, property that's in the parking lot at the hotel. But here's the catch, point A under there. They may avoid strict liability by providing a safe for the guest's use. So they can avoid strict liability by providing a safe. Have you guys ever seen in a hotel room where you walk in and there's a safe? Have you ever used it? I've used it one time, and that was when we were on our honeymoon in Jamaica, because we had taken cash with us for, tips and that kind of thing. And so we kept that in the safe. It is the only time I have ever used a safe at the hotel. But that's what the hotel does to limit their liability. So say I leave all of my jewelry in the room when I go down to go to the pool. Well, say it goes missing. Generally speaking, the hotel is going to be strictly liable because my property was damaged or lost. However, they're going to raise the defense of, we offered you a safe, you didn't use the safe. So therefore, we shouldn't be liable because your property has gone missing. Or at least we shouldn't be strictly liable. We should stand a chance to defend ourselves. Same thing out in the parking lot. Next time you pull up to a parking lot at the hotel, pay attention to the signs. That's like, you are assuming the risk of leaving valuables in your car. Well, that's because if they didn't tell you that, they're going to be strictly liable if stuff in your room or your car goes missing or damaged. So they try to limit that liability by saying, nope, we warned you out in our parking lot. All those signs, we warned you not to leave valuables in your car. We provided you a safe in your hotel room. So basically they're saying we are a professional bailee because your personal property is being left in our possession. But really that's not what they do. They're providing lodging. They're not providing safekeeping for your belongings. They are, but the way they do that is to say, okay, well, we gave you a safe, so a little bit of the blame is going to be on you for not using the safe. And again, I'm as guilty as the rest. I go to a hotel, I leave everything I own in there, and I go out to eat, I do whatever, without ever using the safe. So I'd kind of be hard pressed to make an argument against the hotel if something happened. But you think about it, you've got maintenance in and out of your room. You've got the house, like the cleaning services in and out of your room. It's not smart to leave it all laying there, but we're all guilty of it. But that's what the safe is for. The safe is to limit their liability as a business, so that they are just providing lodging for you, not necessarily, safeguarding for all of your belongings. So any questions on bailments? I know we kind of flew through that, but it's kind of an elementary situation, but it's one that you don't necessarily stop and think like, oh yeah, what are the rights and obligations of people when they've got my property? So